"You're coming with me," Amish man said to the freezing widow collapsed at the station. In the dead of winter, a widow falls face first onto the frozen platform. Passers-by look away, until one plain-clothed farmer lifts her into his arms. His voice is steady, his choice shocking. "You're coming with me." But bringing her home breaks every rule of his strict community. Whispers rise, lanterns flicker, and judgment sharpens like a blade. This widow carries more than sorrow. She holds a dangerous claim that could change both their futures. One man's mercy becomes the talk of the valley. One woman's past threatens to tear apart his faith, his family, and his standing among his own people. Will love and compassion survive when the law of tradition demands she be cast out? Or will mercy cost them everything they hold dear? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The bitter Colorado wind whipped across the train platform, carrying stinging pellets of snow that bit through Sarah Ann McBride's thin coat. Her legs trembled as she stepped down from the rail car, her carpet bag light as air, empty save for a few precious mementos of her life back east. The last of her money had gone to the ticket that had brought her here, to this lonely outpost where she knew no one and had nothing. The station's wooden planks swayed beneath her feet. Sarah Ann's vision blurred, dark spots dancing before her eyes as hunger and exhaustion took their toll. She hadn't eaten properly in days, stretching her meager provisions as far as they would go. Now there was nothing left. Around her, townspeople hurried past, collars turned up against the wind, paying no mind to the struggling woman in their midst. A mother hustled her children along, turning their faces away. A businessman in a fine wool coat stepped widely around her, as if poverty might be catching. Sarah Ann's knees buckled, and she sank to the frozen platform. Lucas Hochstetler stood by the station's freight office, waiting to collect supplies for his farm. His plain black coat and broad-brimmed hat marked him clearly as Amish, setting him apart from the other travelers and townsfolk. He had noticed the woman when she first stepped down from the train. Something in her dignified bearing, despite her obvious distress, had caught his attention. Now, as she collapsed, he didn't hesitate. In long strides, he crossed the platform to where she lay. Sarah Ann was only dimly aware of the strong hands that gently turned her over, of concerned brown eyes studying her pale face. Lucas took in her blue-tinged lips, the hollow cheeks that spoke of too many missed meals. "You're coming with me," he said firmly, his voice cutting through her haze. The words held no question, only calm certainty. Without further discussion, he gathered her into his arms, lifting her as easily as he would one of his younger sisters. Sarah Ann tried to protest, but could only manage a weak murmur. Her head lolled against Lucas's shoulder as he carried her across the platform. She felt the warmth of his solid chest through his wool coat, smelled the clean scent of soap and hay that clung to his clothes. The station master watched their progress with raised eyebrows, but Lucas paid him no mind. His steps were steady and sure as he crossed the snowy street to where his wagon waited. With great care, he settled Sarah Ann onto the wagon seat, tucking warm blankets around her before climbing up beside her. The wagon creaked as Lucas clucked to his horse, urging it forward. Sarah Ann drifted in and out of awareness, lulled by the steady rhythm of hooves on packed snow. The town fell away behind them as they traveled through the gathering dusk. Through half-closed eyes, she caught glimpses of pristine white fields stretching away to distant mountains. The steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves marked time as they traveled. Sarah Ann roused slightly when the wagon turned onto a narrower track, the sound changing as they passed between rows of bare apple trees. Ahead, a farmhouse emerged from the winter twilight, its windows glowing with warm lamplight. Young voices carried across the yard as the wagon approached. "Lucas is back," a girl called out, and Sarah Ann heard the creak of a screen door opening. "Why are you so late?" another voice asked, worry clear in the words. "We were getting concerned." The voices trailed off as Lucas drew the wagon to a halt. Sarah Ann tried to focus on the shapes moving in the doorway. Lucas's sisters, she presumed, though she couldn't make out their faces clearly. The world had taken on a dreamy, unreal quality, everything soft around the edges. She was aware of Lucas climbing down, of his sisters' exclamations of surprise when they saw her. Their voices seemed to come from very far away as Lucas lifted her once again into his strong arms. The last thing Sarah Ann registered was the warmth that washed over her as they crossed the threshold into the house, and then consciousness slipped away entirely, leaving her to the care of these kind strangers who had taken her in from the cold. Inside the farmhouse, warmth from the hearth wrapped around Sarah Ann like a gentle embrace as Lucas carefully laid her in the cushioned chair closest to the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the simple whitewashed walls, illuminating the concerned faces of his two sisters who hovered nearby. "Miriam, fetch the quilts from the trunk," Lucas directed his 16-year-old sister. "And Ruth, would you warm some of the chicken broth from supper?" The girls sprang into action, though Sarah Ann noticed their uncertain glances at each other. Miriam, the taller of the two, disappeared up the narrow staircase, while 13-year-old Ruth moved quietly to the kitchen, her soft footsteps barely audible on the wooden floor. "I found her at the station," Lucas explained to his sisters as they worked. "She was about to freeze in this weather." His voice was steady, matter of fact, though Sarah Ann detected a note of gentle defense in his tone. Miriam returned with 2 thick quilts, their patterns telling stories of careful stitching by loving hands. As she draped them over Sarah Ann, her eyes met her brother's. "Lucas," she whispered, "what will the elders say?" "Taking in an English woman. We'll sort that out tomorrow," Lucas replied firmly. "Tonight, we show kindness." The rich aroma of cornbread and warming broth filled the room as Ruth returned with a steaming bowl. Sarah Ann's eyes fluttered open fully, taking in the simple but spotless room, the oil lamp casting its gentle glow, and the 3 kind faces watching her with mixture of concern and curiosity. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. "You're very kind." Lucas pulled a chair close to hers, making sure she could reach the small table where Ruth had placed the bowl. "Can you manage the spoon?" he asked quietly. Sarah Ann nodded, wrapping trembling fingers around the utensil. The first sip of broth spread blessed warmth through her chest. Fresh-baked cornbread sat on a plate beside the bowl, its golden crust still warm. As she ate, the sisters busied themselves around the room, stealing glances when they thought she wouldn't notice. Lucas remained nearby, his presence steady and reassuring. He asked no prying questions, but when Sarah Ann volunteered that she was a widow seeking work in the West, he nodded with simple understanding. "Many come west looking for new beginnings," he said softly. The lamplight caught the compassion in his brown eyes, and for a moment Sarah Ann glimpsed a shadow of old grief there that matched her own. When the bowl was empty and Sarah Ann's eyelids grew heavy, Miriam stepped forward. "We have a spare bed made up," she offered. "It's small but warm." "I couldn't impose—" Sarah Ann began, but Lucas cut her off gently. "You need proper rest," he said. "The stairs are steep. May I help you up?" Too exhausted to protest, Sarah Ann nodded. Lucas lifted her once more, following his sisters up the narrow staircase. The bedroom they led her to was tiny but neat, with a small window looking out over snow-covered fields. A single bed waited, piled with fresh linens and more quilts. "There's a nightgown you can borrow," Ruth said shyly, pointing to a folded garment on the bed. It was the first time Sarah Ann had heard the younger girl speak. Once the sisters had helped her change and settled her under the covers, they bid her good night. Sarah Ann lay in the darkness, listening to their footsteps retreat down the hall. The bed was soft, the quilts warm, and for the first time in weeks she felt truly safe. "Lord," she whispered into the quiet room, "give me strength for whatever tomorrow brings." Her prayer was simple but heartfelt, born of desperate months that had taught her to lean on faith when all else failed. Downstairs, Lucas sat on the bench by the door, methodically cleaning the snow from his boots. The leather was worn but well cared for, like everything in his modest home. He paused in his work, glancing toward the stairs where their unexpected guest now slept. The community would have questions tomorrow. The elders would likely disapprove of an Englishwoman under his roof. But as Lucas returned to his task, his movements were sure and determined. He had seen too much suffering in his own life to turn away someone in need. Whatever came next, he would not send her back into the cold. The boot brush moved with quiet purpose across the leather, each stroke an unspoken promise of protection. Dawn painted the farmhouse windows with pale winter light, as Sarah Ann woke to the gentle clatter of pots and pans from below. The aroma of frying potatoes and fresh coffee drifted up the narrow staircase, making her stomach rumble. For a moment she lay still, taking in the unfamiliar ceiling beams and the soft warmth of the quilts. Footsteps creaked on the stairs, followed by a gentle knock. "Breakfast will be ready soon," Miriam called softly through the door. "I've left a clean dress outside your room." Sarah Ann found a simple black dress waiting, modest but well made. It fit well enough, though the hem was a bit long. She plaited her hair carefully, trying to make herself presentable for the family that had shown her such kindness. The kitchen below was warm and bright. Ruth stood at the stove, turning potato chunks in a heavy iron skillet, while Miriam set the table with simple wooden plates. Lucas was just coming in from outside, stamping snow from his boots. "Good morning," he said, nodding to Sarah Ann. "I trust you slept well?" "Better than I have in months," she admitted, clasping her hands awkwardly. "Thank you again for your hospitality." They gathered around the table, bowing their heads as Lucas spoke a prayer in German. The food was simple but filling: fried potatoes, eggs, thick slices of bread with fresh butter. Sarah Ann noticed how the sisters took their cues from Lucas, waiting for him to begin before serving themselves. "I thought you might like to see the farm," Lucas said as they finished eating. "If you're feeling strong enough to walk a bit." Sarah Ann nodded eagerly. "I'd like to help with chores to earn my keep." Lucas led her to the barn, their boots crunching through fresh snow. Inside, the air was warm with animal heat. A brown and white cow lowed softly in her stall, while chickens pecked at scattered grain nearby. Two massive draft horses turned their heads to watch them enter, their breath steaming in the morning air. "We rise at dawn for milking and feeding," Lucas explained, running a gentle hand along one horse's neck. "Then there's work in the fields, though less now in winter. Evenings are for scripture, study, and family time." His voice held quiet pride as he described their ordered life. "It sounds peaceful," Sarah Ann said softly, watching as he demonstrated how to approach the cow for milking. Later, trying to help with morning chores, Sarah Ann volunteered to fetch water from the pump. The yard was treacherous with ice, and halfway back, her feet slipped out from under her. She managed to catch herself, but water sloshed over her skirts. To her own surprise, she laughed out loud, a real laugh, the first in longer than she could remember. Lucas, splitting wood nearby, looked up at the sound. Something warmed in his expression, though he quickly returned to his work. Sarah Ann caught herself watching the sure swing of his axe, the way his breath clouded in the cold air, and quickly looked away. Near midday, hoofbeats announced a visitor. An older man in plain dark clothing rode up to the barn where Lucas was working. Sarah Ann, helping Ruth hang laundry to dry indoors, saw the neighbor's eyebrows rise sharply when Lucas gestured towards the house and mentioned their guest. "A widow, you say?" The man's voice carried clearly across the yard. "English too?" "That's unusual, Lucas." "She needed help." Lucas replied simply. "We couldn't leave her to freeze." The neighbor left soon after, but Sarah Ann overheard his muttered words as he mounted his horse. "Lucas has taken in a strange widow. The elders won't like this." Ruth touched her arm gently. "Don't mind Brother Yoda," she said. "He means well, but he worries about everything." As evening drew in, they gathered in the sitting room. Miriam brought out mending, and Sarah Ann gratefully accepted a shirt to work on. The lamplight was dim, but her needle moved surely through the fabric. Outside, through the frost-edged windows, she could see lanterns moving along the road between neighboring farms. "More visitors than usual tonight," Miriam observed quietly, threading her needle. Lucas looked up from his Bible, his face grave but calm. "Let them talk," he said firmly. "We've done what's right." Sarah Ann bent over her mending, trying to ignore the knot in her stomach. The lanterns continued to flicker past like fireflies, each one carrying whispers into the gathering dark. Yet somehow the steady presence of Lucas and his sisters, the warmth of the lamp, and the simple work in her hands made her feel anchored against whatever storms might come. The morning dawned bright and cold 2 days later. Fresh snow blanketed the farm, sparkling like scattered diamonds in the early light. Lucas stood by the barn, adjusting the harnesses on his team of draft horses while his breath frosted in the air. Sarah Ann emerged from the house, wrapped in a borrowed wool shawl. "May I ride along to the mill?" she asked, her voice tentative. "I'd like to be useful, help with the loading, perhaps." Lucas paused, considering. "It's a cold journey," he warned, but nodded. "Though company would be welcome." They loaded the wagon with grain sacks, the horses stamping impatiently in their traces. Sarah Ann climbed up beside Lucas, tucking thick blankets around them both. The wagon creaked as they set off, wheels crunching through fresh snow. The forest path wound between towering pines, their branches heavy with white. Only the clip-clop of hooves and the occasional cry of a winter bird broke the silence. Sarah Ann watched her breath cloud in the air, aware of Lucas's solid presence beside her. "How did you come to be at our station that night?" Lucas finally asked, his voice gentle. He kept his eyes on the road ahead, giving her space to answer or stay silent. Sarah Ann's hands tightened in her lap. "My husband, he died in the mines back east, cave-in." The words came slowly, each one weighted with grief. "After that, I couldn't stay. The company that owned the mine, they wouldn't acknowledge their fault, claimed he was careless, blacklisted me when I tried to fight for his rights." Lucas listened quietly, letting her speak at her own pace. "I thought heading west might mean a fresh start." She managed a weak smile. "Though I didn't plan on nearly freezing to death at your station." "God's ways are not always clear to us," Lucas said softly, "but he guides our steps." The mill came into view, its water wheel frozen still in the creek. Other wagons were already lined up, their drivers in plain, dark clothing like Lucas's. As they pulled to a stop, Sarah Ann noticed the sideways glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when they drew near. Lucas helped her down from the wagon, his hand steady and warm. While he discussed the grinding with the miller, Sarah Ann stood by the horses, stroking their frost-flecked necks. Two men passed behind the wagon, their voices carrying clearly in the cold air. "Bishop's been clear about Hannah Stoltzfus," one said. "She'd make Lucas a proper wife. Good family, knows our ways." "Aye," the other agreed. "He's meant to court her, not waste time with some English widow." Sarah Ann's cheeks burned despite the cold. She turned away, pretending to adjust the horses' blankets while fighting back tears. Of course, there would be someone else. Someone proper, someone who belonged in his world. What had she been thinking, letting herself feel so comfortable in his home? The ride back was quieter, the easy conversation of the morning replaced by heavy silence. Sarah Ann kept her eyes fixed on the passing trees, trying to ignore the ache in her chest. She had no right to feel this way. She was nothing but a burden, disrupting the orderly pattern of his life. Evening settled over the farmhouse in shades of purple and gold. Sarah Ann barely touched her supper, despite Miriam's concerned looks. "I'm just tired," she said, forcing a smile. "Think I'll turn in early if you don't mind." Upstairs in the quiet darkness, she finally let the tears come. They slid silently down her cheeks as she curled up on the bed, still fully dressed. She could hear voices drifting up from below, Miriam and Ruth, their tones questioning. "Hannah came by again yesterday," Miriam was saying. "She brought that apple pie, asked after you." Ruth's voice chimed in. "Bishop Stoltzfus thinks it would be a good match, Lucas. She's been alone since Johann passed, and she knows our ways." Lucas remained silent. Through the floorboards, Sarah Ann could hear only the crack and pop of the fire, imagining him staring into the flames. The tears came faster now, soaking into her pillow. She had to leave soon, find work somewhere, anywhere. She couldn't stay here, watching him court another woman, seeing the disapproval in neighbors' eyes. Outside her window, the moon rose over the snowy fields, casting long shadows across the untouched white. Sarah Ann pressed her hand against the cold glass, wondering how something that had felt so much like sanctuary could suddenly feel so much like pain. Grey shadows crept across the farmhouse floor as Sarah Ann moved quietly down the stairs, her worn carpet bag clutched tight against her chest. Each creaking floorboard made her pause, heart thundering. The first hint of dawn barely touched the windows, and the house lay silent, except for the tick of the mantel clock. She had packed her few belongings with trembling fingers: the faded dress, the tin of hairpins, the treasured photograph of her late husband. Better to slip away now, she thought, before she caused more trouble in this peaceful household. But as she reached for the door latch, a familiar voice spoke from the shadows. "Where do you plan to go in such bitter cold?" Sarah Ann startled, turning to find Lucas standing near the kitchen doorway, already dressed for morning chores. His eyes held concern, not accusation. "I cannot stay," she whispered, fingers tightening on her bag. "You know that as well as I do. The talk in town, at the mill, I am endangering your standing in the community." "Is that what troubles you?" Lucas stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "The whispers of others. You are meant to court Hannah Stoltzfus." The words spilled out before she could stop them. "I heard the men talking. She is proper for you, from your world. While She gestured helplessly at herself. "I bring only difficulty. God brought you to my door that night," Lucas said, reaching for her carpet bag. His large hands closed over hers, warm and steady. "He does nothing without purpose, even if we cannot yet see his plan. But your neighbors, the bishop, will learn that mercy comes before judgment." Lucas carefully took the bag from her grip, setting it aside. "You are no burden here, Sarah Ann. Stay until you have strength. That is all I ask." She stood trembling, torn between the urge to flee and the warmth in his eyes. Finally, she gave a small nod. "For now," she whispered, "though I cannot promise how long." "Each day has trouble enough of its own," Lucas replied softly, quoting scripture. "Come, the morning is cold, and Miriam will have breakfast ready soon." As the sun climbed higher, Sarah Ann tried to settle back into the household routine. She helped Ruth knead bread dough, hanging her head when the younger girl smiled knowingly at her failed escape attempt. Near midday, Miriam appeared in the kitchen doorway, worry creasing her brow. "Ma'am's cough is worse," she said. "She can barely sit up to drink her tea." Sarah Ann followed the sisters upstairs to where their mother lay beneath a mound of quilts. The elderly woman's breathing came in wheezing gasps, her face flushed with fever. "I was a nurse's aide before." Sarah Ann hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "Let me help." The sisters exchanged glances, then nodded. Sarah Ann set to work, propping the sick woman up with pillows, mixing honey and herbs for her cough. Her hands moved with practiced gentleness as she bathed the feverish face with cool cloths. "Thank you," Miriam whispered hours later, as their mother finally drifted into peaceful sleep. "We didn't know what to do." Sarah Ann squeezed her hand. "She needs watching through the night. I can take first shift if you'll show me where to find more willow bark for her tea." Outside, the winter sun sank behind the mountains, painting the snow-covered yard in shades of pink and gold. Lucas walked the familiar path between house and barn, his breath frosting in the gathering dusk. The evening star appeared above the trees, bright and lonely in the darkening sky. He paused, watching lamplight spill from the upstairs window where Sarah Ann tended his mother. His heart felt as divided as the shadows stretching across the snow. Pulled between the warmth her presence brought to his home and the disapproving murmurs of his community. The bishop would visit soon, he knew. Questions would be asked about the English widow under his roof, about his duty to consider Hannah Stoltzfus as a proper wife, about the example he set as a leader in their church. Lucas turned his face to the cold wind, seeking clarity in its bite. The easy path would be to bend to their expectations, to guide Sarah Ann toward a position in town, perhaps as a seamstress or teacher, to court Hannah as everyone wished. But when he thought of Sarah Ann's attempt to flee that morning, of her gentle care for his family despite her own wounds, something in his soul rebelled against taking that easy path. Surely God's way was wider than the narrow road his neighbors would choose for him. The first stars emerged as Lucas completed his evening check of the animals. Tomorrow would bring its own trials. For tonight, he could only trust that the same providence which had guided Sarah Ann to his door would light the way forward, one step at a time. The week unfolded like a well-worn quilt, each day stitched with new learning. Sarah Ann rose before dawn, pulling her shawl tight against the morning chill as she followed Lucas to the barn. The cow's warm breath made clouds in the cold air as Lucas demonstrated the rhythm of milking. "Like this," he said, his strong hands moving in steady motions. Gentle but firm. Sarah Ann settled onto the wooden stool, reaching hesitantly for the cow's udder. Her first attempts brought only a few drops, but Lucas stood patient beside her, guiding her hands until she found the right touch. By week's end, streams of warm milk rang steadily against the tin pail. In the kitchen, Miriam showed her the secrets of Amish bread making. "The yeast must bloom just so," she explained, sprinkling the precious granules into warm water. Sarah Ann kneaded the dough with growing confidence, learning to feel when it was ready for rising. Soon the farmhouse filled with the scent of fresh-baked loaves, golden and crusty. The chicken coop became her morning sanctuary. She scattered feed while talking softly to the hens, collecting warm eggs from beneath ruffled feathers. Sometimes she caught Lucas watching her from the barn door, a quiet smile touching his face. One crisp morning, Lucas found her struggling with the splitting maul, trying to break kindling for the cook stove. Without a word, he stepped behind her, adjusting her grip on the handle. "Let the weight of the head do the work," he murmured. His hands covered hers, showing her how to swing. The wood split with a satisfying crack. Sarah Ann felt warmth rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with exertion. In return, she shared her own skills. During evening rest times, she taught his sisters the fine embroidery stitches her mother had passed down. Miriam proved an eager student, her needle dancing through fabric as Sarah Ann guided her through intricate patterns. "These will fetch good prices at market," Sarah Ann explained, holding up a delicately stitched handkerchief. "Far more than plain ones." Ruth's eyes sparkled. Perhaps enough for new hymn books. The days settled into comfortable rhythm until Sunday arrived, bringing both anticipation and anxiety. Sarah Ann smoothed her plain dress, borrowed from Miriam and hastily altered, as Lucas helped her into the wagon. The meeting house stood stark against the winter sky, its white walls gleaming. Inside, families arranged themselves on wooden benches, children fidgeting in Sunday best. As Lucas led Sarah Ann to a seat, whispers rustled like dry leaves through the congregation. She felt eyes upon her, curious, judging, concerned. A woman pulled her daughter closer as they passed. An elder frowned into his beard. Bishop Abraham Stoltzfus watched from his raised seat, his stern gaze following their every move. The service passed in a blur of German prayers and unfamiliar hymns. Sarah Ann kept her eyes lowered, acutely aware of her outsider status. When the final song ended, she hurried towards the door, but not before catching snippets of conversation. The English widow, living under his roof? What can he be thinking? The wagon ride home stretched long and silent. Finally, Sarah Ann turned to Lucas, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I've caused scandal by coming today. Perhaps it would be better if I hadn't." Lucas's hands tightened on the reins. "No," he said firmly. "God's house should welcome all who seek him. Kindness must come before judgment, always." That evening, as snow began falling in lazy spirals, Sarah Ann sat with Miriam by the fire. The younger girl's fingers stumbled over her embroidery as she hummed a half-remembered tune. "Would you teach me that hymn properly?" she asked suddenly. "Your voice is so clear and sweet." Sarah Ann hesitated, then nodded. The familiar words rose soft and uncertain at first, gaining strength as Miriam joined in. Together their voices lifted, weaving through the lamplight like threads of gold. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. That saved a wretch like me. Outside, the snow continued falling, muffling the world in white silence. But inside, wrapped in warmth and song, Sarah Ann felt something long frozen begin to thaw. Her voice soared with Miriam's, no longer afraid to be heard, no longer ashamed to hope. Lucas paused in the doorway, drawn by their singing. The lamplight caught the tears shining in Sarah Ann's eyes, but her smile was radiant as she guided his sister through the verses. He watched them a moment longer, then quietly withdrew, leaving them to their music and the gentle fall of snow. The storm descended without warning, thick clouds rolling over the mountains like a grey wool blanket. By mid-morning, heavy snow was falling in earnest, coating the farmyard in deep drifts. Sarah Ann watched from the kitchen window as Lucas struggled through knee-deep snow toward the barn. Without hesitation, she pulled on her borrowed coat and boots. The bitter wind stung her face as she pushed through the drifts, following Lucas's tracks. Inside the barn, she found him shoveling paths between the stalls. "Here," she said, grabbing a spare shovel. "Let me help." Lucas paused, studying her with concern. "The work is hard." "I'm stronger than I look," Sarah Ann replied, already digging in. Together they cleared paths for the animals, their breath making clouds in the cold air. The horses nickered softly as they worked, and the cow lowed from her stall, impatient for hay. Sarah Ann's arms ached, but she matched Lucas shovel for shovel. When he noticed her slowing, he wordlessly took the heavier loads, leaving her the lighter work without making her feel weak. By late afternoon, they had cleared paths to all the outbuildings and made sure the animals were warm and fed. "You work well," Lucas said quietly as they headed back to the house. "Like you've known farm life before." "My grandmother had a small farm," Sarah Ann answered, brushing snow from her skirts. "Before we moved to the mining town." The kitchen welcomed them with warmth and the smell of bean soup simmering. Miriam and Ruth had kept the fire well stoked, and Lucas's mother's cough echoed faintly from upstairs. They shed their wet things by the door and gathered around the table, grateful for hot food after the day's labor. As evening settled in, they moved to the sitting room. The lamp cast a gentle glow as Ruth worked on her mending and Miriam dozed in the rocking chair. Lucas added wood to the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. Sarah Ann sat close to the warmth, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Something about the peaceful scene, so different from her past life, loosened the tight knot of memory in her chest. When Lucas settled into his chair nearby, she found herself speaking softly. "My husband, Thomas, worked in the coal mines of Pennsylvania," she began. "He was a good man who believed in fairness. When the company cut wages again, he helped organize a petition for better pay and safer conditions." She stared into the flames, remembering. "The company branded him a troublemaker. They threatened to fire anyone who signed, but Thomas said someone had to speak up, or nothing would ever change." Lucas listened intently, his face grave in the firelight. Sarah Ann's voice grew quieter. "The mine collapsed on a Tuesday morning. Thomas and 11 others were trapped. The company waited too long to start rescue efforts, saying conditions were too dangerous." Her hands tightened around the cup. "By the time they reached them, it was too late." Ruth had stopped her mending, and Miriam was fully awake now, both sisters watching with sympathy. "After that, no one would hire me," Sarah Ann continued. "The company made sure of that. They said I was trouble, just like Thomas. I sold everything I had for a train ticket west, hoping to find work as a seamstress where no one knew my name." Silence filled the room when she finished, broken only by the crackling fire. Finally, Lucas spoke, his voice gentle. "Your husband was a brave man, standing up for what was right." Sarah Ann nodded, wiping away a tear. "He always said our conscience must answer to God, not to men." "He spoke true," Lucas said softly. The sisters soon retired upstairs, leaving Sarah Ann and Lucas by the fire. Neither spoke for a long while, but the silence felt comfortable, understanding. Lucas watched the flames, his heart heavy with her story, but also filled with admiration for her strength. He recognized now that what had started as Christian duty had grown into something deeper, an affection he hardly dared name. When Sarah Ann finally rose to seek her bed, Lucas remained by the fire, lost in thought. He understood now why God had brought her to his door that snowy night, not just as someone needing help, but as a soul whose courage and faith matched his own. Upstairs in her small room, Sarah Ann knelt by her bed. The moonlight filtered through falling snow outside her window as she clasped her hands in prayer. "Dear Lord," she whispered, "have I finally found refuge here? Is this where you meant me to be?" She paused, listening to the quiet house, thinking of Lucas's steadfast kindness and his sister's growing acceptance. "Please show me your will." The snow continued falling outside, blanketing the valley in pristine white, while inside the farmhouse, two hearts wondered separately about the path God had set before them. February arrived with softening snow and hints of coming spring. The morning sun cast long shadows across the farmyard as Lucas led Sarah Ann to the barn, where his draft horses stood ready, their breath steaming in the cool air. "You need to learn handling the team," Lucas said, adjusting the heavy leather harness. "It's important work on a farm." Sarah Ann eyed the massive horses uncertainly. "They're so big. Won't they mind a stranger directing them?" "They're gentle giants," Lucas assured her, patting one horse's broad neck. "Just need a firm hand and clear signals." He helped her up onto the wagon seat, then joined her, placing the reins in her hands. "Hold them steady like this." Her fingers trembled slightly as she gripped the leather straps. The horses shifted, sensing her nervousness. When she clicked her tongue as Lucas had shown her, the right horse stepped sideways instead of forward, making the wagon lurch. "Oh!" Sarah Ann laughed, her cheeks pink with embarrassment. "They're not listening to me at all." Lucas's quiet chuckle joined hers. "They're testing you. Show them you mean business." She straightened her shoulders and tried again, this time speaking more firmly. The horses responded better, though their path wavered across the snowy field. Lucas's steady presence beside her gave her confidence, and soon she was guiding the team in wider circles, her handling growing smoother with each round. "You're a natural," Lucas said softly, watching her face glow with accomplishment. The morning passed swiftly as Sarah Ann mastered basic commands and turns. When they finally headed home, both were flushed with cold air and shared joy, though neither spoke of the warmth growing between them. That evening, the family prepared for the community's monthly hymn singing. Sarah Ann changed into her best dress, still plain by Amish standards, and twisted her hair into a neat bun. As they walked toward the Yoda's barn, where the gathering would be held, her steps slowed. "Maybe I shouldn't go," she murmured. "Some might not welcome an outsider." Lucas turned to her, his eyes gentle but firm. "You belong with us. Music brings all God's children together." Inside the barn, lanterns cast a warm glow over the gathered families. Hay bales had been arranged in rows, and the smell of fresh straw mingled with wood smoke from the heating stove. Sarah Ann followed Lucas's family to their seats, aware of curious glances from others. Bishop Abraham Stoltzfus stood at the front, his stern presence commanding attention. Sarah Ann saw Hannah Stoltzfus nearby, perfectly dressed in her dark blue dress and white prayer covering, the very picture of an proper Amish widow. The singing began, familiar hymns rising in the traditional a cappella style. Sarah Ann knew some of the melodies from her own church background, though the German words were foreign to her. Lucas noticed her hesitation and quietly translated the key phrases, helping her follow along. As the evening progressed, Sarah Ann's voice grew stronger. During Amazing Grace, sung in English, her clear soprano lifted naturally above the group. Lucas's rich baritone harmonized perfectly with hers, their voices weaving together as if they'd sung together for years. Miriam and Ruth exchanged knowing looks at the beautiful blend of their voices. Other singers noticed too, some smiling in appreciation, others frowning slightly at the obvious connection between Lucas and the English widow. In a pause between songs, Sarah Ann felt truly part of something special. The sense of community, the shared faith expressed in music, touched her heart deeply. For a moment she could imagine belonging here permanently. Then she caught movement near the barn door. Bishop Stoltzfus had drawn Hannah aside, their heads bent close in whispered conversation. The bishop's face was dark with disapproval as his eyes flicked toward where Sarah Ann sat with Lucas. Hannah's expression held both satisfaction and determination as she nodded at whatever the bishop was saying. Sarah Ann's heart, so recently lifted in song, sank heavily. The joy of the evening dimmed as reality pressed in. No matter how well she fit with Lucas and his family, no matter how much she yearned to belong, there were those determined to see her as an unwelcome outsider. The singing continued, but Sarah Ann's voice had lost its confidence. Lucas noticed her withdrawal and moved slightly closer, his steady presence offering silent support. His sisters, too, seemed to sense her distress, flanking her protectively as the evening drew to a close. The final hymn filled the barn with four-part harmony, a song about God's faithful guidance through dark valleys. Sarah Ann joined in softly, clinging to the promise of divine protection, even as she felt the weight of judgment pressing in from the shadows beyond the lantern light. Morning sunlight streamed through the barn windows as Lucas finished the early chores. The crunch of approaching footsteps in the snow made him look up. Young Eli Fisher stood in the doorway, his expression uncomfortable. "Bishop wants to see you right away," Eli said, shifting from foot to foot. "The elders are gathered at his house." Lucas's stomach tightened, but he kept his face calm. "Tell them I'll come after I feed the stock." "They said now," Eli insisted quietly, then hurried away through the crisp morning air. Lucas set down his pitchfork and brushed off his clothes. Through the barn door, he could see Sarah Ann helping his sisters hang laundry, her laugh carrying across the yard as she struggled with frozen sheets. The sight made his heart both warm and heavy. The bishop's house loomed dark against the winter sky. Inside, 5 elderly men sat in a somber semicircle, their beards grey and faces stern. Bishop Abraham Stoltzfus stood by the wood stove, his tall form casting a long shadow. "Lucas Hochstetler," the bishop began without greeting, "we must speak of your situation with the English widow." Lucas remained standing, his hat in his hands. "Sarah Ann McBride is a guest in need of Christian charity." "She has overstayed proper hospitality," Elder Yoder cut in. "People are talking. It's not right for an unmarried woman to live under your roof." "The solution is clear," Bishop Stoltzfus said. "Send her away. Hannah Stoltzfus is a worthy widow of our faith, ready to be a proper wife and mother to your household." Lucas felt cold despite the heat from the stove. "Sarah Ann has nowhere to go. The winter is harsh. Then you leave us no choice." The bishop's voice hardened. "If you do not remove her by week's end and begin proper courtship with Hannah, you risk being shunned. Think of your sisters, your ailing mother. Would you have them cut off from their community?" The threat hung heavy in the air. Lucas stared at the rough floorboards, his mind whirling. Being shunned meant complete isolation. No one would buy his grain, help with harvest, or even speak to his family. His sisters would never marry within the faith. His mother would die without her church community. "You have until Sunday to decide," Bishop Stoltzfus concluded. "Now go, and may God guide you to wisdom." Lucas walked home slowly, his boots leaving deep prints in the snow. The weight of the ultimatum pressed on his shoulders. Inside the house, Sarah Ann looked up from her mending with a smile that faded when she saw his face. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. He forced a slight smile. "Just tired from morning chores." He couldn't bring himself to share the bishop's threat, not yet. Not while he still wrestled with what to do. That afternoon, the stagecoach rattled through town. The driver pulled up at their farm, waving an envelope. "Letter for Sarah Ann McBride." Sarah Ann's hands trembled as she opened the official-looking document. Her face went pale as she read. "What is it?" Lucas asked, concerned. "It's about John's mining claim in Colorado," she whispered. "The one he died trying to protect. His partner refiled it in my name. Says there's silver there. They want me to come claim my rights as his widow." She sank into a chair, the paper shaking in her grip. "With this, I could be independent, buy my own place, never worry about being destitute again." Lucas felt his heart constrict. The letter offered her escape, a chance at security without depending on anyone's charity, without needing him. That evening, Lucas paced the barn long after chores were done. The lantern cast jumping shadows as he wrestled with his choices. The ordnung was clear. The bishop's authority came from God. To defy it meant turning his back on everything he'd been raised to believe, everything that ordered their peaceful way of life. Yet something deeper stirred in his heart. Wasn't protecting the vulnerable also God's command? Sarah Ann's gentle spirit, her willing hands, her kind care for his family. Surely these were gifts from heaven. How could showing her the door be right? Inside the quiet house, Sarah Ann lay in her narrow bed, the letter clutched to her chest. The mining claim promised freedom, a fresh start with means to support herself. No more depending on charity, no more causing trouble for the family that had shown her such kindness. But the thought of leaving brought an ache to her chest. In the weeks since arriving, she'd found more than shelter here. She'd found purpose in the daily rhythms of farm life, found friendship with Lucas's sisters, found something warming and deep growing between her and Lucas himself, though neither had spoken of it. The letter offered security, but her heart whispered that real treasure lay in love and family, not silver in the ground. Still, could she stay if it meant bringing hardship to those she'd grown to care for? Through the cold night, two souls wrestled with matters of conscience, duty, and the yearnings of the heart. The moon cast blue shadows across the snow as both Lucas and Sarah Ann faced decisions that would change not only their own lives, but the lives of all around them. The cold shoulder from the community grew colder still over the next 3 days. At the general store, men who had once warmly clasped Lucas's hand now turned away, suddenly fascinated by barrels of nails or sacks of grain. Women pulled their children closer when he passed, as if his presence carried something catching. Lucas felt the sting of each slight, though he kept his face carefully neutral. He had lived among these people all his life, shared their joys and sorrows, helped raise their barns and bring in their harvests. Now they treated him like a stranger. Sarah Ann noticed everything. She saw how the baker's wife hurried inside when Lucas approached the shop, leaving fresh bread cooling on the sill. She heard the whispers at the water pump when she went to fill buckets. Most of all, she saw the growing worry in Miriam and Ruth's eyes when they returned from church meeting, their faces drawn with unspoken concerns. The mine letter weighed heavy in her pocket, a constant reminder that she had choices, that she need not be the stone around Lucas's neck, dragging him down into troubled waters. That evening, as steam rose from bowls of potato soup, Sarah Ann cleared her throat. "I've made a decision," she said quietly. "I'm leaving to claim John's mining rights in Colorado." Spoons clattered against bowls. Ruth gasped. "But you can't. You belong here with us?" Miriam added, her voice breaking. Lucas set down his spoon, his face gone still as stone. "Sarah Ann, there's no need." "There is every need." She cut in gently. "I see how the community treats you now. Your whole future here is at risk because of my presence. I cannot allow that." "The community will come around," Lucas insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah Ann shook her head, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Your life is here, Lucas. Your faith, your family's place in the church. I won't be the reason you lose all that." Ruth burst into tears, fleeing the table. Miriam followed, her own eyes wet. The sound of their sobs drifted down the stairs, making Sarah Ann's heart ache. "Please," Lucas said softly, "don't do this." But Sarah Ann stood, gathering the bowls with trembling hands. She could not meet his eyes, afraid her resolve would crumble if she saw the pain there. After the dishes were done, she climbed the stairs to her small room. The carpet bag lay open on the bed as she carefully folded her few dresses. Each one held memories. The blue calico she'd worn while learning to milk the cow, the brown wool she'd mended by firelight, the grey cotton she'd worn to Sunday meeting. Downstairs, Lucas sat alone by the dying fire. The flames had burned down to glowing coals, casting more shadows than light. His deep voice rose softly in prayer. Lord, show me the way. Your word says to care for widows and strangers, but also to honor the church and keep peace with my brothers. Which path is your will? Give me wisdom to see clearly. The crackle of embers was his only answer. Upstairs, Sarah Ann knelt beside her bed, hands clasped tight. Dear Father, she whispered, grant me strength to do what must be done. Help me be grateful for this brief season of shelter and not bitter that it must end. And please, her voice caught on a sob, please watch over Lucas and his family when I am gone. Moonlight painted silver squares on the floor as she rose and finished her packing. The carpet bag held little more than when she'd arrived, but her heart felt so much heavier. In these few months she had found more than refuge. She had found a place where her soul felt at home. But love sometimes meant walking away. She reminded herself firmly. Better to leave now, while she still had the courage, than wait until the community's rejection forced Lucas to choose between his faith and his kindness to her. The mine rights would give her a fresh start. She could build a new life, one that didn't risk bringing pain to those she had grown to care for so deeply. Even if it meant leaving her heart behind in this quiet farmhouse, with the steady man who had lifted her from the snow that winter day and carried her to safety. Through the wall, she could still hear Lucas's voice rising and falling in prayer. The sound wrapped around her like a warm shawl, and she hugged herself, trying to memorize the feeling. Tomorrow would be soon enough to say goodbye. For tonight, she would let herself remember every precious moment of belonging she had found here, storing them up like treasure to sustain her through the lonely days ahead. Dawn painted the eastern sky in pale brushstrokes of pink and gold as Sarah Ann crept down the stairs, each wooden step creaking softly beneath her feet. Her woolen cloak and warmest dress did little to ward off the chill that seemed to come from within. The carpet bag, light as it was, felt heavy as lead in her hand. She had written a note of gratitude, left propped against the kitchen lamp where Lucas would find it. The words felt inadequate to express all that this family had come to mean to her, but they were all she could manage without breaking down completely. At the door, she paused to drink in the familiar scents of the farmhouse one last time. Fresh baked bread, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, the lingering sweetness of apple butter. Her hand trembled on the latch. You're leaving without saying goodbye. Sarah Ann's heart clenched at Lucas's quiet voice behind her. She hadn't heard him descend the stairs, but there he stood in the dim light of dawn, still in his nightshirt with suspenders hastily drawn over his shoulders. I thought it would be easier this way, she whispered, not turning around. Easier for whom? She pulled the mining claim letter from her pocket, holding it out to him with trembling fingers. This proves my right to John's claim. I can make my own way now. You won't have to worry about me anymore. Lucas took the paper, but didn't look at it. Sarah Ann, please. The community will come around in time. No. She shook her head firmly, though tears threatened. They won't. Not as long as I'm here causing trouble. Your whole life is in this community, your family's place in the church, your sister's chances for good marriages, your mother's care. I won't be the reason you lose everything. You're not. I am. She cut him off. Every day I stay makes it worse. Finally turning to face him, she forced herself to meet his eyes. "Thank you for all you've done, Lucas. I'll never forget your kindness." Before he could respond, she yanked open the door and hurried out into the crisp morning air. The snow crunched beneath her boots as she made her way to the barn where the wagon stood ready. She had prepared it the night before, not wanting to wake anyone with the sounds of hitching. Lucas followed her out into the yard, the letter still clutched in his hand. "Sarah Ann, wait!" But she climbed onto the wagon seat, gathered the reins with shaking hands, and clicked to the horses. The big team moved forward, their hooves breaking through the thin crust of ice atop the snow. She didn't look back, couldn't bear to see Lucas standing there in the growing light. The wagon rolled down the long drive and turned onto the snow-packed road toward town. Sarah Ann blinked hard against the tears that threatened to freeze on her cheeks. The familiar landscape seemed to mock her with its beauty. The snow-laden pines, the rose-gold sky, the sparkling crystals of frost that turned everything into a fairyland. How many mornings had she admired this same view while doing chores, feeling as if she truly belonged? Back at the farm, Lucas stood rooted in place, watching the wagon grow smaller in the distance. A harsh cough from the upstairs window made him look up. His mother's window. The sound sparked something in his chest. Who would tend to her now? His sisters tried their best, but Sarah Ann's gentle nursing had brought more improvement in the past months than they'd seen in a year. It wasn't just his mother, either. Sarah Ann had become woven into the very fabric of their lives, her laughter brightening the kitchen, her clever hands making quick work of endless tasks, her quiet strength supporting them all. The thought of the house without her presence felt wrong, like a song missing its harmony. The decision crystallized in his heart. Without pausing to change out of his nightshirt, Lucas ran to the barn and saddled his fastest horse. He swung into the saddle, ignoring the bite of the cold morning air. "Ha!" he called, spurring the horse forward. They galloped down the snowy road, hooves thundering in the quiet dawn. Ahead, the wagon had reached the fork where the road split, one way leading to town, the other winding up toward the mining country. Sarah Ann had drawn the team to a halt, uncertain which path to take. Tears froze on her cheeks as she stared at the diverging roads, each representing a different future. The thunder of hoofbeats made her turn. Through the pale morning light, Lucas galloped into view, his suspenders flapping, his breath clouding in the cold air. "Sarah Ann!" he called, his deep voice carrying across the snow-hushed landscape. "Sarah Ann, wait!" Lucas reined his horse to a halt in front of the wagon, snow spraying from the animal's hooves. His breath came in white puffs, and his nightshirt fluttered in the crisp morning breeze. Sarah Ann sat frozen on the wagon seat, her hands tight on the reins, tears glistening on her cheeks. "Please," Lucas said, his voice carrying clearly across the still morning air. "Don't go." Sarah Ann shook her head, though her hands trembled. "I have to. You know I have to." The bishop quote. "The bishop doesn't decide what God puts in our hearts," Lucas interrupted, his usually quiet voice firm with conviction. "You were never a burden, Sarah Ann. Not for a single day. God sent you to us that night at the station. I know it as surely as I know spring follows winter. But you're standing in the community," she protested, her voice breaking. "Your whole life is here. I can't ask you to give up everything." Lucas guided his horse closer to the wagon. "You're my family now. You and what we've built together these past months. The way you care for my mother, teach my sisters, work alongside me as if you've always been here." He reached across the space between them, offering his hand. "That matters more than any man's approval." Sarah Ann stared at his outstretched hand, tears flowing freely now. "They'll shun you. Your sisters will suffer for it." Then we'll face it together." Lucas said simply. "The Ordnung teaches us to live right, but sometimes mercy must come before law. Christ himself taught us that." Sarah Ann's shoulders shook with quiet sobs. She pulled the mining claim papers from her pocket again, but this time she held them out toward Lucas with different intent. "I don't want it," she whispered. "Any of it. All the gold in those mountains means nothing if it means losing you." Lucas took the papers gently, then captured her cold hands in his warm ones. "Then we'll walk whatever path God lays before us together. Whether that means working this farm or starting fresh somewhere else, I don't care, as long as you're beside me." The draft horses stomped restlessly in their traces, their breath steaming in the cold air. Sarah Ann looked into Lucas's earnest face, seeing there all the strength and gentleness that had first drawn her to him. "Are you certain?" she asked softly. "Truly certain?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he answered, and the quiet conviction in his voice swept away her last doubts. Lucas helped her down from the wagon seat, and she fell into his embrace, no longer trying to hold back her tears. He held her close, one hand stroking her hair as the rising sun painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold. When they finally parted, Lucas smiled. "Let's go home." They turned the wagon around together, Lucas leading his horse alongside as they made their way back to the farmhouse. The morning had warmed slightly, and fat snowflakes began to drift down from the pearl-grey sky. Sarah Ann found herself watching them dance in the air, marveling at how differently they looked now that her heart was light again. The sun was setting by the time they approached the farm, painting the snow-laden fields in deep purple shadows. Lamplight glowed in the farmhouse windows, a beacon of warmth against the gathering dusk. As they drew near, the front door flew open. "They're back!" Miriam's voice rang out across the yard. "Ruth! Ruth, come quick! Sarah Ann's come back!" The two girls burst out of the house, not even stopping for their cloaks. Ruth's face was streaked with tears as she ran through the snow, and Miriam was beaming so broadly it looked as if her face might split. They reached the wagon just as Lucas helped Sarah Ann down, and both girls threw their arms around her. "We were so worried," Ruth whispered, pressing her face into Sarah Ann's shoulder. "When we found your note." "I'm sorry," Sarah Ann murmured, holding them both close. "I'm so sorry I tried to leave." "But you came back," Miriam said firmly, wiping her eyes. "That's what matters." Lucas watched them with a gentle smile, then began unhitching the team. The girls pulled Sarah Ann towards the house, chattering about keeping her breakfast warm and how they'd prayed she'd return. As they reached the porch, Sarah Ann turned back to look at Lucas. He caught her eye and nodded, a silent promise passing between them. Whatever storms lay ahead, they would weather them together. As family. The late winter days stretched into early spring, bringing with them a steady rhythm of shared purpose. Each morning, Lucas guided his plough horse through the thawing fields, while Sarah Ann transformed the household with her keen eye for trade. Her delicate embroidery work, featuring intricate Pennsylvania Dutch patterns she'd learned from Miriam, found eager buyers at the general store. "You've got quite a gift there," the shopkeeper remarked one afternoon, counting out coins for her latest batch of handkerchiefs. Sarah Ann smiled, already calculating how to stretch the money for seeds and supplies. At home, her gentle nursing continued to work wonders. Lucas's mother, once confined to her bed, now sat by the window for hours, her cough easing as Sarah Ann's herbal teas and patient care took effect. The older woman's eyes held growing warmth when she watched Sarah Ann teach Ruth to knead bread or help Miriam with her reading. The neighbors noticed too. Though they maintained their distance, their sideways glances held more curiosity than judgment now. The Hostetler farm was flourishing. Fences mended, garden plots expanded, and the house itself seemed to glow with fresh vitality. One peaceful evening, the family gathered around the scripture reading. Lucas's deep voice blended with Sarah Ann's as they took turns reading verses, the sisters following along. The lamplight cast warm shadows on their faces as they shared insights, united in faith and purpose. The crunch of footsteps in the yard drew their attention. Through the window, they saw multiple lanterns approaching through the dusk. Lucas straightened as he recognized Bishop Stoltzfus among the elders. But when the men entered, their stern faces had softened. The bishop spoke carefully about the visible blessings on the household, how Sarah Ann's care for the sick demonstrated true Christian charity. Though he stopped short of formal approval, his words carried clear meaning. The family would be left in peace to follow their conscience. After the elders departed, Lucas reached for Sarah Ann's hand, squeezing it gently. No words were needed. Their patience and steadfast love had begun to bridge the gap between tradition and grace. Spring arrived like a gentle awakening, painting the Colorado Valley in fresh colors. The morning dew sparkled on tender grass shoots pushing through the dark soil of Lucas's fields. In the barn, 2 new calves wobbled on spindly legs while their mothers watched with patient eyes. The farm hummed with renewed energy, as if God himself had breathed fresh life into every corner. Sarah Ann stood at the kitchen window, watching Miriam and Ruth chase each other through rows of sprouting vegetables. Their laughter carried on the breeze, a sound that still made her heart swell. How different from those first desperate days when she'd stumbled off the train with nothing but an empty carpet bag and fading hope. As the Sunday evening sun began its slow descent, Lucas gathered them all onto the wide front porch. The wooden boards still held warmth from the day's sunshine. He bowed his head, his strong farmer's hands clasped in prayer. "Lord," he spoke softly, "we thank you for new beginnings, for green fields and fresh hope, for family found in unexpected places." His fingers tightened around Sarah Ann's, and she felt tears prick at her corners of her eyes. Miriam and Ruth settled on the porch steps, their faces glowing in the golden light. They began to sing an old hymn, one Sarah Ann had learned during those first weeks in their home. Her voice joined theirs, no longer hesitant but clear and strong, carrying across the peaceful farmyard. Lucas lit the porch lantern as dusk deepened. Its warm light pushed back the gathering shadows, just as love had pushed back the darkness in Sarah Ann's life. She watched the flames' gentle dance, remembering how she'd once collapsed alone and cold on that station platform. Now, through Lucas's unwavering mercy, she had everything she'd thought lost forever, a family to cherish, a future to build, and a faith rekindled by daily acts of grace. Though some in the community still kept their distance, others had begun to bridge the gap. Sister Miller had brought bread last week, and Brother Yoda had helped Lucas repair the fence. Small kindnesses, like spring flowers, were blooming one by one. Sarah Ann leaned against Lucas's steady shoulder, surrounded by the family God had given her. At peace in the home love had built. Thanks for being here. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, a truth, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another moment that just might speak to your soul.